"We're keeping it small." He said it casually, like he was talking about traffic or where to park. There was a pause after that, the kind that assumes the conversation is over. I didn't ask who would be there. I didn't ask how small meant. I didn't ask if I was included. Not because I didn't care, but because I already knew how that question would sound. After we hung up, I stayed where I was. I finished what I was doing. I didn't send a follow-up text later. I didn't circle back the way I sometimes did, when I tried to make room for myself without asking for it. By that evening, the sentence had settled quietly. Not like bad news, more like a fact I hadn't been told out loud before. Nothing had been taken from me. Nothing had been argued. But something had shifted. And once it did, I realized I had already started waiting, instead of being chosen. When my son first mentioned the wedding, it wasn't an announcement. It came folded into another conversation, the way practical things often do. He needed to know if a certain weekend worked for me, not because of the ceremony itself, but because they might be traveling the week before. I answered the question he asked. Nothing more. At the time, that felt right. After that, information arrived in fragments. A venue somewhere outside the city. A date that shifted slightly. Each update came with a brief apology, a note about how fast everything was moving. I said it was fine, and most days, it was. I wrote the date into my planner in pencil, lightly, as if it might move again, or as if I wasn't sure yet whether it was something I should commit to imagining. There were moments when I thought to ask what kind of gathering it would be, big or small, family-heavy or simple, but those moments never found a clean opening. Our conversations had a rhythm. He called between meetings, while walking, while driving. There was always the sense that he was fitting me into the edges of his day, not avoiding me, just managing time carefully. I learned which questions slowed things down, and which ones didn't. Once, he mentioned they were finalizing the guest list. He said it quickly, almost mechanically, as if reading it off something in front of him. Then he moved on to the caterer. I listened. I didn't interrupt. There was no pause that invited response. No space where my opinion seemed expected. Over the years, I had learned to wait for signals rather than create them. Without noticing at first, I began phrasing things differently. Instead of asking when I should arrive, I asked whether there was anything they needed help with. Instead of offering ideas, I said I was around if it would be useful. These were small shifts, almost invisible, but they made conversations smoother. He sounded relieved when I kept things simple. That mattered to me more than the details. The wedding became something I heard about in summaries. They'd chosen colors. They'd booked a photographer. Each piece of information arrived complete, sealed, as if there were nothing more to add. I received it that way. I thanked him for telling me. I didn't ask what came next. At some point, I realized I had stopped picturing the day altogether, not because I didn't care, but because imagining required assumptions I no longer felt authorized to make. It was easier to stay with what was certain. The next call, the next update, the familiar pause at the end of a sentence. So when he finally said they were keeping it small, it didn't arrive as a shock. It fit. It felt like the natural outcome of many small adjustments, each one reasonable on its own. I said I understood. He thanked me. The call ended right on time. Afterward, I didn't feel the need to explain anything to myself. I closed the planner, put it back where it belonged. I returned to the routines that didn't require decisions. It was easier to let the arrangement stand as it was, to allow the wedding to exist nearby, but not at the center. In that position, there was less to manage. And managing, I realized later, it had never really been the point. At first, the feeling was easy to dismiss. It didn't arrive as worry. It felt more like a small disruption in rhythm. Something slightly out of place, but not enough to stop what I was doing. I told myself that was normal. Weddings were busy. People had a lot to coordinate. Everyone was tired. I remembered earlier holidays, when things had been louder, more crowded, more assumed. Back then, I knew when to arrive without asking. I knew which dish to bring. I knew where my coat would go. That year, I still baked cookies. I did it without thinking. The recipe was muscle memory by now. Butter softened on the counter. Dough resting while I cleaned the kitchen. I packed them carefully, the way I always had. Not because anyone had asked. Because it felt like what I did. When I mentioned them during a call, he paused briefly, just long enough for me to notice. "Oh, that's nice," he said. Then, almost immediately, "We're pretty busy here. Love you." It's grabbly off for is appassively prose. The sentence ended cleanly. No question followed. No suggestion of where the cookies would go. I told myself I'd misunderstood the pause. That I was reading too much into tone. After all, he had said he loved me. The feeling didn't go away. It followed me through ordinary moments. Standing in line at the store, folding laundry, driving home. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet sense that I was preparing for something I hadn't been asked to attend. I tried to make sense of it logically. Of course they were overwhelmed. Of course plans changed. Of course communication was scattered. I told myself this was what adulthood looked like. Children growing into their own lives. Mothers stepping back. I reminded myself not to be difficult. Not to take things personally. Not to turn practical decisions into emotional ones. That reminder had served me well over the years. Still, I noticed small things. I checked my planner more often than necessary. The date was still there. Still written in pencil. I noticed how often I reread messages before responding, looking for the simplest reply, the least disruptive one. I stopped asking open-ended questions. I kept things neat, contained. When friends asked about the wedding, I answered in general terms. It's coming together. It's Raldit, it's no Graham. They're keeping it simple. End quote. I heard myself say those things before I thought about whether they were true. Sometimes, late at night, I replayed conversations. Not to analyze them, just to hear them again. There was always something slightly unfinished. A sentence that closed too quickly. A topic that shifted before it settled. I told myself I was being sensitive, that this was my issue to manage. I had always been good at managing myself. I remembered earlier years, when I had opinions, when I spoke without rehearsing first, when I assumed my presence. Those memories didn't make me sad. They felt distant, like another version of me who belonged to a different structure. I noticed how easily I filled silence now. How quickly I reassured. It's fine. Whatever works. Integrate. Don't worry about me. End quote. I meant those things. I still do. But I also noticed how often they came up. The unease didn't grow. It stayed the same size. That was what made it difficult to address. There was no clear moment to point to. No single conversation that felt wrong. Everything was polite, reasonable, explainable, and yet, I began to feel as if I were hovering at the edge of something important, close enough to see movement, too far to know my place. I didn't tell anyone about the feeling. There was nothing to report. I didn't confront my son. There was nothing to confront. Instead, I adjusted. I waited for information instead of asking for it. I listened more than I spoke. I made room where I could. I told myself this was maturity, grace, understanding, and maybe it was. But the unease stayed. It didn't ask to be resolved. It didn't demand attention. It simply followed me, from room to room, from call to call. Not loud enough to interrupt, not quiet enough to disappear. I learned to live alongside it, the way you live with a sound you can't quite locate. By the time I realized it hadn't gone away, it had already begun to feel familiar. And familiarity, I would later understand, is how some things settle in, without ever announcing themselves. The first time I chose not to say something on purpose, it happened quickly enough that I almost missed it. He mentioned they had settled on a start time, and I registered the information without asking what it meant for arrival or seating. The question formed and stopped in the same moment. There was no confusion about whether I could ask. I simply didn't. The decision felt practical. The call was already running long, and he had other things to do. Adding another detail would have slowed the conversation without offering anything necessary. I nodded to myself, even though he couldn't see me, and let him continue. When we hung up, the time remained just that a number without instructions attached. After that, the pattern repeated. Information came through, and I received it without reaching for more. When he said they had finalized the schedule, I said that was good to hear. When he mentioned a seating arrangement, I commented that it sounded organized. These responses kept everything moving forward. They didn't create openings that would need to be filled later. I noticed changes in my own behavior before I thought of them as changes. I waited longer before responding to messages, not out of hesitation, but because there was no urgency. I stopped drafting questions in my head during conversations. I let silences stay where they were, trusting that if something required my input, it would be stated clearly. At one point, he sent a group message with a few logistical notes, addressed to several people at once. I read it twice, looking for anything that applied specifically to me. There wasn't anything. I didn't reply. No one followed up. The exchange closed without my participation, and nothing seemed delayed by that. This absence of friction made everything feel smoother. There were fewer points where I had to decide how to fit myself into the process. The edges were defined elsewhere. My role, whatever it was, no longer required shaping. I rearranged my schedule without explanation. I declined an invitation that fell on the same weekend, citing a possible conflict, then left it at that. I didn't specify what the conflict was. Keeping it vague allowed the decision to remain flexible, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances. When friends asked for updates, I kept my answers brief. I said things were coming together. I said it would be soon. These statements satisfied the questions without inviting further discussion. I wasn't withholding anything. There simply wasn't more to say. There was a moment when I realized I hadn't asked about the rehearsal dinner, or the morning after, or any of the surrounding events that used to be part of such occasions. The realization didn't carry weight. It registered the way noticing a habit change does, without judgment. The absence of those questions felt consistent with everything else. Silence began to function as a default rather than a response. It saved time, it prevented misalignment, it allowed other people to make decisions without waiting for confirmation that I would adjust accordingly. This efficiency seemed to benefit everyone involved. On a quiet afternoon, I moved a chair slightly away from the center of the room to make space for something else. The adjustment was minor, almost invisible, but it made the room easier to navigate. I didn't think about it again once it was done. When another update arrived, a brief note saying they had everything covered, I replied with a thumbs up. The exchange ended there. The conversation didn't require anything more from me, and I didn't offer it. By then, stepping aside no longer felt like a choice that needed to be made each time. It had become the most reasonable option available. Everything continued to move forward without pause, and I found that I could move with it by staying where I was. The updates began to arrive already resolved. Decisions were made, details settled, and then passed along as information rather than invitations. He would mention that they had adjusted the timeline, or that they'd decided against something they'd previously considered, and the way he said it made clear there was no longer a question attached. I listened, took note, and let the matter rest where it landed. Sometimes the messages came secondhand. A forwarded email with the subject line still intact, a screenshot of a confirmation page. These fragments carried just enough context to be understood without requiring response. I read them and put the phone down. Nothing followed. Nothing needed to. The process continued without interruption. When one detail shifted, another took its place, and the sequence remained intact whether I acknowledged it or not. I noticed this without surprise. The flow didn't depend on my attention. It moved around me, efficient and self-sustaining. When I was mentioned, it was briefly as a reference point rather than a participant. Someone had asked whether I preferred one option over another, and the question had been answered on my behalf. He told me about it afterward, not apologetically, just informatively. I said that was fine. It was photographs circulated from a planning meeting I hadn't known about. They showed a table with papers spread out, cups of coffee, someone's hand pointing at a list. I recognized the setting, but not the moment. The image felt complete without me in it. I closed it after a moment and returned to what I had been doing. There was no sense of being left out because nothing had been removed. The structure had simply adjusted itself. I was still included in the sense that I received the outcome. I knew what was happening. I just wasn't part of how it happened. I found that this position required very little effort. I didn't need to remember timelines or follow up on tasks. I didn't need to coordinate with anyone. My involvement had narrowed to awareness, and awareness alone was manageable. When a final count was confirmed, he told me the number as if it were a statistic. He didn't elaborate on who made it onto the list or how choices had been made. The figure stood on its own. I acknowledged it and moved on. At home, I noticed how easily the days accommodated this new arrangement. There were no interruptions, no moments where I had to recalibrate plans because something had changed. The wedding existed as a series of completed actions, each one reported after the fact, and that consistency made it predictable. I adjusted without announcing it. I stopped setting reminders for calls that might not come. I cleared space in my schedule and let it remain open. These changes didn't feel like losses. They felt like housekeeping. When someone asked whether I was excited, I paused long enough to consider the question, then answered in a way that didn't require expansion. I said it would be nice. The response satisfied the exchange. No one pressed further. The updates continued, steady and contained. I received them, noted them, and placed them where they belonged. Nothing stalled, nothing waited on me. The absence of my involvement didn't register as a gap, only as a difference in placement. By then, it was clear that my presence, while acknowledged, was no longer necessary to the functioning of the event. That recognition arrived quietly, without reaction. I accepted it the way one accepts a change in seating, noticing the view is different, then settling in. The pattern became visible through repetition rather than contrast. There was no moment when everything shifted at once. Instead, the logic revealed itself gradually, in the way contact appeared and receded according to need. When a question came up that required something from me, the call was immediate. He needed a document. He needed confirmation of a detail only I could provide. He needed something clarified from years earlier. In those moments, I was reached easily, directly, as if no distance had ever formed. I answered. I provided what was asked. The exchange concluded. Afterward, the contact diminished again. Days passed without updates. Decisions resumed their quiet progression elsewhere. The rhythm repeated often enough that it no longer felt coincidental. I didn't frame this as intentional on anyone's part. There was no sense of calculation. It operated more like a system that responded automatically to certain conditions. When a specific function was required, the corresponding part was activated. When it wasn't, the system continued without it. I noticed how seamlessly I stepped into those moments of usefulness. There was no hesitation, no internal debate. The request itself carried its own justification. I responded promptly, efficiently, and without expectation of further involvement. That efficiency seemed to be appreciated. He thanked me and moved on. The clarity came from observing this cycle without trying to interrupt it. I didn't ask for more contact during the quiet periods. I didn't extend the conversations beyond their immediate purpose. Doing so would have altered the pattern, and I wanted to see it clearly before touching it. Each instance reinforced the same structure. My presence was relevant when it served a function. Outside of that, it was optional. Not unwanted, just unnecessary. This understanding didn't arrive with accusation or self-regard. It felt factual, like noticing how traffic lights operate or how schedules are built. The system wasn't personal, it was practical. I became aware of how long I had been comfortable within that practicality, how often I had shaped myself to fit what was required in a given moment. The habit had formed slowly, reinforced by the ease it created. When things moved smoothly, it seemed reasonable to maintain the conditions that allowed that. The wedding planning highlighted this more clearly because the requests were specific and time-bound. Each time I was contacted, there was a defined need. Each time it was met, the need disappeared, and so did the contact. The clarity of that sequence left little room for interpretation. At one point, he called to ask about an old family connection, someone he thought might be able to help with a detail. I provided the information. He thanked me, said it was helpful, and ended the call. Later, I learned the matter had been resolved through another channel. The outcome didn't involve me further. I noticed how neutral that felt. There was no sense of being replaced or overlooked. The system had simply found another solution once the immediate requirement was met. The phrase came to me without emphasis, without a need to examine it closely. I was useful again. The words didn't carry weight beyond their accuracy. They described a state, not a judgment. Understanding this didn't prompt a change in behavior. I didn't withdraw. I didn't assert myself. I continued to respond when contacted and to remain quiet when I wasn't. The clarity didn't demand action. It only removed confusion. The pattern held. Requests appeared. I fulfilled them. The contact receded. The process continued. Seeing it clearly made it easier to stop searching for meaning beyond what was there. There was a steadiness to this realization. It didn't elevate or diminish anything. It simply aligned observation with experience. The system operated as it always had. I was no longer misreading it. When the next message arrived asking for something specific, I answered it. When nothing followed, I accepted that too. The cycle completed itself without commentary. By the time the planning reached its later stages, the structure was unmistakable. My involvement was defined by function alone. Recognizing that didn't require explanation or response. It stood on its own, clear and contained, and I let it remain that way. The place wasn't introduced as an alternative to anything else. It existed on its own, outside the sequence of calls and messages that had begun to define my days. I went there because it was there, because the timing worked, because there was no reason not to. It didn't require explanation, and it didn't invite one. The drive was uneventful. I didn't think about where I was going in relation to anything else that was happening. There was no comparison to be made. The road unfolded in a way that didn't demand attention beyond staying in the lane. When I arrived, there was no one waiting and no one expecting anything from me. That absence registered immediately. Inside, the space held its shape regardless of who entered it. Nothing shifted to accommodate me. There were no cues about how long to stay or what to do first. I took off my coat and set it down without deciding where it belonged. The act felt ordinary, unremarkable. Time moved differently there, not slower or faster, just without markers. I wasn't checking my phone. There was no reason to. If something needed me elsewhere, it would announce itself clearly, the way it always had. Until then, the quiet remained intact. I noticed physical details without assigning them meaning. The way the chair supported my weight evenly. The way the light fell across the floor without highlighting anything in particular. My shoulders dropped at some point, though I didn't register when. The change wasn't dramatic enough to track. There were moments when thoughts surfaced, as they tend to do, but they didn't organize themselves into questions. They passed through without stopping. Nothing in the room responded to them, and that seemed to keep them from gathering momentum. I didn't feel watched or evaluated. There was no sense of needing to justify my presence. I wasn't useful there, and usefulness wasn't requested. That absence of expectation didn't create relief so much as neutrality. It removed a layer I hadn't realized was constantly engaged. I stood up at one point and moved to another part of the room, not because I needed to, but because the option existed. The movement didn't signal a transition. It didn't mean anything. I sat again when I felt like it. The space didn't react to my choices. It didn't reward them or complicate them. I could stay or leave without consequence. That flexibility existed without being named. My body adjusted in small ways. Breathing settled into a steady rhythm. I became aware of it only because there was nothing else competing for attention. The awareness didn't prompt commentary. It was simply there. There was no urge to fill the quiet, no impulse to make myself productive. The absence of tasks didn't create restlessness. It created a kind of suspension, where nothing needed to be resolved before moving on. I thought briefly about how unfamiliar that felt, then let the thought go. The space didn't encourage reflection. It didn't discourage it either. It remained unchanged regardless of what crossed my mind. When I left, I didn't feel as though I was returning from anywhere. I stepped back into the day without a sense of transition. The world outside continued at the same pace it always had. Cars passed. People moved with purpose. None of it paused to acknowledge where I'd been. The effect of the place didn't follow me as a feeling. It followed me as a difference in how little I needed to adjust when the next message came in. I read it, responded briefly, and set the phone down again. The exchange didn't pull me out of anything, because there was nothing to be pulled from. I went back another time, and then again. Each visit was similar enough not to require anticipation. The space remained consistent. It didn't become familiar in a way that suggested ownership or belonging. It simply remained available. I didn't talk about it. There was no reason to mention it in conversations that were already narrow and efficient. The place didn't ask to be integrated into the rest of my life. It existed alongside it, without commentary. In that neutrality, I found I could stand without positioning myself. I wasn't preparing for anything or recovering from anything. I was there, and that was sufficient. The space didn't confirm or deny that. It didn't need to. When I left the last time before everything else began to press in again, I noticed that I stood straighter without thinking about posture. The change didn't announce itself. It didn't persist as an idea. It was simply the way my body moved through the door. Nothing had been fixed. Nothing had been replaced. The space had asked for nothing, and in doing so, it had left everything as it was. That neutrality stayed with me, quiet and unclaimed, as the rest of my life continued to operate as before. The letter arrived in the middle of an ordinary week. Not handwritten. Not urgent. Just a message, forwarded and formatted carefully, as if someone had already thought through how it should sound. Amanda wrote that things had become complicated, that plans were shifting, that they needed help. She didn't say it directly. She didn't have to. There were phrases that did the work for her. Just for a few months. Anyone. Until things settle. It's Creditin. You understand how these transitions are. Tanshir. I read it once. Then again. On the surface, it was reasonable. People needed space. Families adjusted. I felt the first layer of pressure settle quietly. The kind that comes from systems already in motion. Housing. Schedules. Logistics. That didn't pause to ask how they would land. The second layer followed quickly. My son called later that evening. His voice carried the same careful tone I'd heard before. Measured. Already halfway toward an answer. He talked about timing. About what made sense. About how temporary it would be. He didn't ask if it was possible. He spoke as if the question had already passed. The third layer didn't come from words. It came from the imagined reactions. The looks I wouldn't see. The explanations I wouldn't give. A mother helping her children. A woman being flexible. The quiet approval that comes when you don't complicate things. I could already hear how it would sound if I said yes, and how it would sound if I didn't. The fourth layer was internal. It arrived as a familiar reflex. The urge to rearrange myself, to make space where there hadn't been space before. I began calculating automatically. What could move? What could be postponed? Which parts of my routine were optional? I noticed how quickly my peace started to feel negotiable. The fifth layer was time. Not the calendar kind. The cumulative kind. Years of being the one who adapted, who waited, who made room. All of it pressed forward at once. For a moment, I considered doing what I had always done. Responding carefully, leaving the door open without saying so. I imagined the relief in their voices, the ease that would follow, and I felt something tighten instead. Not anger, not resentment, recognition. I realized that if I agreed, it wouldn't end in a few months. It would end when something else required me to shrink again. So I said no. The word didn't come easily. It didn't arrive with confidence. It came quietly, almost apologetically. I can't, I said. Not now. There was a pause on the other end of the line, longer than usual. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He sounded surprised. Then careful. Well, he said, we'll figure something out. Be never rebel. The conversation ended shortly after that. I sat where I was for a long time. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel relieved. I felt exposed. The peace I had built hadn't expanded. It had been noticed. And once noticed, it felt fragile. That night, I slept lightly, waking without knowing why. In the morning, nothing had changed. No follow-up messages. No explanations. Just the quiet knowledge that I had disrupted something. Not their plans. The pattern. I hadn't taken control. I hadn't reclaimed anything. I had only refused to give more. And that refusal didn't settle anything yet. It hovered, unanswered, unresolved. The space I had protected still felt borrowed, as if it might be requested again. I went through my day as usual. Coffee, errands, small conversations that stayed on the surface. Everything looked the same, but underneath, something was shifting, not toward freedom, not toward certainty, toward a moment I knew hadn't arrived yet. I hadn't won. I hadn't lost. I had only stepped out of a movement that expected me to keep going, and the weight of that pause was heavier than I expected. He arrived without warning. I heard the car before I saw it, the sound of tires slowing on the gravel road I knew by heart. For a moment, my body reacted before my thoughts did. A tightening in my chest, a familiar instinct to prepare. By the time I opened the door, that instinct had already begun to fade. Jeremy stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking as if he wasn't sure whether to step forward or explain himself from a distance. "This place feels different," he said. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't feel the need to respond. Inside, nothing had been arranged for him. No extra chair pulled out, no coffee already waiting. He noticed that too. We sat across from each other, not close, not far. "I feel like you've changed," he said. The words landed in my body before they reached my thoughts. A dull pressure behind my ribs, the kind that used to signal I should soften. I didn't. "Good," I said. The word came out steady, but my hands were cold. He blinked. Not angry, disoriented. "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "You just seem less available." Ah, there it was. I waited for the familiar urge to explain, to reassure him that I was still the same person, that I still cared. It didn't come. Instead, I felt something heavier settle in my shoulders. Not resistance. "Wait." I didn't step away, I said. I stopped adjusting. End quote. "We do Cam that..." He leaned forward, his voice tightening. "We didn't push you out," he said. "Things just got complicated." It's private. Complicated. The word pressed against something inside me that had already been sore. "I know," I said. "You didn't say anything," he continued. "How were we supposed to know?" Problem. My throat tightened. Not with tears. With restraint. "I was always quiet," I said. "That's how it worked." End quote. He frowned. "That's not fair." End quote. My heart began to beat faster then. Not from anger. From the effort of staying where I was. "I'm not saying it was intentional," I said. "I'm saying it happened." End quote. He stood up and paced the room, his movements quick, unsettled. "It feels like you're punishing us," he said. The old reflex flared. The need to make things easier, to absorb the discomfort so it wouldn't spread. I felt it move through me and pass. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm staying. I have the story." The word "stayed" echoed in my chest. Heavy, anchored. He stopped pacing, looked at me as if trying to locate something familiar. "I don't know how to do this with you now," he said. My hands were trembling slightly. I pressed them together. "You'll figure it out," I said. "So will I." It devilly doer. There was no relief in saying it, only firmness. He left shortly after that. I stood alone in the doorway, the quiet pressing in from all sides. My body was still buzzing, not with victory, with shock. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't explained myself. I had answered honestly, and that honesty had cost me something I couldn't name yet. That was the day everything shifted. Not because I said no, but because I didn't retreat afterward. I didn't feel stronger. I felt exposed, like something essential had been moved out of reach, but it didn't feel wrong. It felt irreversible, and my body knew it. Before my mind had time to decide what it meant, the waiting didn't end with a decision or a statement. It thinned out, gradually, until there was nothing left that resembled it. There was no single day when I noticed it was gone. The absence revealed itself through routine, through the ease with which days passed without the old markers. I stopped checking my phone at certain hours, not deliberately, not as a rule, but because there was no longer an expectation attached to those times. Messages arrived when they arrived. If they didn't, the space remained unoccupied. The wedding approached. I knew this because dates moved closer on the calendar, because conversations around me referenced it casually. I didn't feel pulled toward it or away from it. It existed, complete and self-contained, without requiring my orientation. I was still in contact with my son. We spoke occasionally. The conversations were functional, polite, unstrained. They didn't circle back to what had shifted. They didn't need to. The relationship continued without the role that had once defined my position within it. What disappeared wasn't connection. It was the posture of anticipation. The small forward lean that had accompanied each interaction, the readiness to respond, to adjust, to fill gaps before they appeared. That posture had no place to settle anymore. I noticed how stillness replaced preparation. Mornings began without the mental checklist that used to organize them around potential needs. Evenings ended without the sense that something might arrive late and require immediate attention. The day held its shape without interruption. There was no feeling attached to this change that required naming. It didn't register as relief or regret. It registered as completion. The waiting had done what it could do, and then it stopped being necessary. I thought about the ways I had occupied space before, the habit of standing slightly forward, of listening for cues that hadn't yet been given. That habit had faded without resistance. There was nothing to maintain it once the conditions that sustained it were gone. The absence didn't announce itself. It didn't demand recognition. It functioned quietly, the way a discontinued route does once traffic finds other ways through. Life adjusted without commentary. I remained available in the sense that I was reachable. Calls could come through, messages could arrive, but availability no longer carried pursuit. There was no leaning toward the sound of the phone, no interpretation layered onto silence. The line stayed open without being extended. The wedding day passed. I knew this because the date changed, because photographs appeared later, shared without ceremony. I looked at them once. They showed a moment that had occurred without me, and that fact didn't require processing. The images were complete. I went on with the day as it was. There were errands to run, small tasks that had nothing to do with family systems or expectations. They filled the time in the way ordinary things do, without reference to what might have been. The role that had kept me waiting no longer existed. It hadn't been replaced by another. There was simply a space where it used to be, unoccupied and stable. The absence didn't create a vacuum. It created a boundary. Silence changed its function. It was no longer an act of patience or restraint. It became a neutral state, free of intention. There was nothing to hold back and nothing to prepare for. Silence simply existed as the absence of signal. I didn't close doors. I didn't make declarations. The relationship remained, intact and unaltered in its basic form. What ended was not connection, but the stance I had taken within it. There was no ceremony to mark that ending. It didn't require acknowledgement to be real. It settled into place the way completed things do, without asking to be revisited. When I thought about the future, it didn't arrange itself around waiting. Plans formed without contingency. Days stood on their own, not as placeholders for something else. That independence wasn't earned or claimed. It arrived as a result of subtraction. I understood then that nothing had been taken away. Something had simply stopped existing. The version of myself that had leaned forward, that had held space for requests before they were spoken, no longer had a function to perform. I didn't lose my son. I lost the version of me who begged. Life did not pause to acknowledge the change. The days continued to stack in familiar order, indistinguishable at first from the ones before. Morning arrived at the same time. Stores opened and closed on schedule. People I passed nodded the way they always had. There was no external signal that anything had shifted. I moved through my routines without replacing what had fallen away. I still bought groceries, still folded laundry, still made plans that filled the calendar just enough to give shape to the week. None of these actions carried a secondary purpose anymore. They existed for themselves, complete without reference to something else. There were conversations that followed predictable patterns. Polite exchanges at work, brief updates with neighbors, laughter that rose and settled without lingering. These interactions connected at the surface and stopped there. No one pressed deeper, and I didn't invite it. I noticed how habits returned without their former attachments. I baked out of rhythm rather than anticipation, the process unfolding without an imagined recipient. I cleaned the kitchen before bed because it made the morning easier, not because someone might arrive early or need something unexpectedly. The actions felt intact, stripped of their earlier implications. The phone rested where I left it. I checked it when it was convenient. Messages came sporadically and were answered in time, not immediately. The absence of urgency changed the shape of the day more than any deliberate adjustment could have. When I ran into acquaintances who knew about the wedding, the topic surfaced briefly and passed. Comments were exchanged, observations made. I nodded, responded, and let the conversation move on. There was no desire to anchor myself in the event by retelling it from any angle. It had occurred. That was enough. Time moved with a quality that was neither light nor heavy. It carried no promise. It offered no reckoning. The hours passed in sequence, each one complete on its own. I didn't wait for evenings to end or mornings to begin. The day functioned without me pushing against it. I continued to attend gatherings when they appeared on the calendar. I arrived on time, stayed an appropriate length, and left without explanation. These appearances didn't signal re-entry into anything. They maintained continuity without implying return. There was a steadiness to this suspended state. Not comfort, not strain, just an evenness that required little management. I could hold a conversation without scanning for subtext. I could leave a room without wondering what would happen after I did. At times, I noticed the absence of the forward pull that had once guided my attention. That pull had structured decisions, framed priorities. Without it, choices appeared flatter, less charged. I selected options based on practicality rather than alignment. The difference was subtle but persistent. Nothing stepped in to fill the space left behind. No new role presented itself. No alternative demand rose to claim the hours. The absence remained unoccupied, stable in its emptiness. I kept moving through the week, marking time by tasks completed rather than expectations held. When plans changed, they did so without personal consequence. Adjustments were made and forgotten. The continuity felt provisional without suggesting an endpoint. This was not a transition toward something else. It was an extension of ordinary life, proceeding without the previous framework that had given it direction. I didn't describe this state to anyone. It didn't require translation. It existed without needing to be understood. Attempts to explain it would have introduced emphasis where none was present. Days accumulated. The suspended quality held. Nothing resolved, nothing escalated. The absence stayed where it was, and life accommodated it without comment. Understanding arrived later, after the sequence had already established itself. It didn't interrupt anything. It surfaced quietly, as an alignment between observation and memory, rather than a discovery that demanded response. I noticed patterns that had always been there, now visible, because they no longer governed my movement. The way availability had been assumed, the way responsiveness had been read as agreement. These realizations didn't provoke correction. They clarified without offering revision. There were moments when the past arranged itself differently, not as regret or comparison, but as context. Actions that had once seemed neutral revealed their structure when viewed without involvement. The clarity was informational, not corrective. I didn't entertain alternate timelines. There was no impulse to imagine different choices or to measure outcomes against what might have occurred. The sequence had unfolded as it had. The understanding came too late to change it, and that lateness was part of its nature. This recognition didn't alter behavior. I continued to respond as before, neither more nor less. The knowledge didn't instruct me. It simply sat alongside the present, complete without application. I found that I could hold this awareness without tension. It didn't demand allegiance. It didn't insist on being used. It existed as something seen, not something acted upon. There were conversations where I sensed the old expectations moving beneath the surface. I let them pass, not out of restraint, but because addressing them would have required reopening structures that no longer organized my life. The understanding didn't compel confrontation. I noticed how silence functioned differently now. It wasn't a strategy or a sacrifice. It was a state that didn't require maintenance. I could let a pause remain without assigning meaning to it. The clarity didn't sharpen my language. If anything, it reduced the need for explanation. I answered questions plainly. I didn't expand where expansion wasn't requested. The simplicity felt accurate. When memories surfaced, they did so without invitation and without narrative arc. A phrase remembered, a habit recalled. These fragments didn't assemble into a lesson. They passed through as evidence of continuity rather than error. I recognized how easily understanding can arrive after utility has ended. The sequence felt familiar in other areas of life. The pattern seen once participation ceased. The recognition didn't elevate me above it. It placed me beside it. There was no impulse to share this clarity. Doing so would have implied instruction or warning. Neither applied. The understanding belonged to its timing, not to a future audience. I accepted that knowing doesn't always correspond with changing. The awareness stood complete without needing to produce an effect. It didn't seek validation. Life continued with its usual demands. Work required attention. Appointments needed keeping. These obligations didn't feel diminished by the absence of a larger organizing role. They existed at their proper scale. I moved through the day with this recognition present but not central. It didn't sit in the foreground. It informed without guiding. When the past came into focus, it did so without apology or defense. There was nothing to correct. The clarity didn't assign fault. It simply outlined how things had functioned. I understood more now, and that understanding arrived without urgency. It didn't insist on being carried forward. It didn't ask to be resolved. The recognition settled into place, quiet and unobtrusive. I let it remain there, neither acting on it nor setting it aside. It belonged to the present as much as it belonged to what had already passed. Nothing needed to be said about it. The understanding had arrived. It stayed. The days continued. The room remained after everything else had settled. It did not mark time or anticipate use. It held its shape through the day and into the evening, unchanged by whether anyone passed through it or not. Light moved across the floor and then receded. The room did not respond. A chair sat where it had been left. It was not positioned for conversation. It faced neither window nor door. The space around it was clear, not arranged to suggest arrival or departure. It could be used or not. The room did not signal preference. I entered without checking the hour. There was no reason to measure the moment. I stood for a while before sitting, not to decide anything, just to let the movement complete itself. The chair held my weight without adjustment. Nothing creaked or shifted to acknowledge it. The window was open enough to admit air, not enough to suggest invitation. Sounds from outside arrived and passed through without lingering. A car door closed somewhere. A voice carried briefly, then dissolved. None of it required interpretation. I rested my hands where they fell. There was no object placed there on purpose, nothing to be held or examined. The absence did not feel intentional. It felt settled. Time did not gather here. It did not ask to be filled. The space allowed minutes to exist without stacking them into progress. I did not count them. I did not notice their passing until they were already gone. The door remained where it was, not shut, not open wide. It did not frame the room as interior or exterior. It allowed movement without announcing it. Anyone could cross it. No one did. I thought briefly about the idea of waiting and found no posture that matched it. There was no forward lean, no listening for a sound that had not yet arrived. The body remained upright without tension. Breath continued without emphasis. The room did not remind me of anything. It did not echo earlier scenes or call back to other versions of itself. It existed only as it was now, without reference. That lack of reference felt complete. I noticed how stillness functioned here. It was not the result of restraint. It did not hold back motion. It simply occupied the space where motion was unnecessary. The stillness did not harden. It remained open. The chair across the room stayed empty. It had not been arranged for someone else. Its emptiness did not register as absence. It was simply unused. The distance between the chairs was neither close nor far. It did not suggest conversation or separation. I did not rehearse anything. There were no words waiting to be said. The mind moved lightly, touching nothing long enough to claim it. Thoughts appeared and passed without assembling into direction. At some point, the light changed enough to notice. The angle softened, shadows lengthened and then thinned. The room accepted the change without signaling an ending. I stood and moved to the window, not to look for anything, but because the space allowed it. The view outside was ordinary: buildings, a street, the suggestion of movement beyond the frame. Nothing aligned itself with expectation. I did not lean out. I did not withdraw. The window did not ask me to choose between inside and out. It remained where it was, a boundary without emphasis. Returning to the chair, I sat again. The movement did not reset anything. It did not create a before or after. It was simply another position occupied for a time. The room did not ask who I was or what I intended. It did not mirror or resist. It did not offer recognition. That neutrality did not flatten the space. It widened it. I became aware of how little there was to conclude. Nothing here required resolution. The space did not need to be understood. It did not point forward or backward. It allowed itself to remain. The door stayed as it was. The possibility of movement existed without pressure. I could leave, or not. The option did not weigh more in either direction. A phrase drifted through my mind without anchoring itself. If you're listening, it did not attach to a person or an expectation. It did not wait for a response. It passed through and left the space unchanged. I did not repeat it. There was no need. The room did not receive or reject it. It did not hold on to words. The chair remained steady. The floor held its surface. The walls did not close in or recede. The space did not compress around presence or expand in its absence. It stayed consistent. I sat until sitting no longer registered as an action. Standing would have been just as unremarkable. The choice did not announce itself. When I finally rose, it was not to end anything. It was simply the next movement available. The room did not record the departure. It did not shift to mark it. The door remained open enough. The light outside continued to change. The chair returned to being unused. The space held. Nothing followed. Nothing needed to.